After watching this video, you won't even think about ending up on the wrong side of the law.
Of the first arrivals to Gitmo were captured on his orders.
They'd had sensory deprivation.
Hidden away in some corners of the world are prisons known for their extreme and terrifying punishments. These places are not just about keeping people locked up. They are about making them suffer in ways that are hard to imagine. Trust me, you wouldn't want to end up in any of these places. Today, we'll be counting down the 20 most brutal prisons with the most bizarre punishments. Number 1. ADX Florence. Located in the Fremont County of Colorado, ADX Florence is a supermax prison that houses some of the absolute worst criminals in the United States. Being a supermax means that it's one level higher than maximum security, and that's needed because these criminals are violent and pose a threat to the prison staff, other inmates, or even national security. So what's bizarre about this prison? Well, this a clean version of hell keeps inmates in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day. Even exercise is done in isolation and is often referred to as a dog run. It offers the kind of loneliness that drives people crazy. Literally, there's a lack of natural light and fresh air, which results in severe psychological effects on the inmates and deterioration of mental health. It is reported that at least 8 inmates have ended their lives over the years, and this number is only increasing. Some notable inmates include the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, the 9/11 conspirator Zacarias Moussaoui, and the notorious Mexican drug lord El Chapo. And if you think this prison was terrifying, wait till you hear about the other ones on our list. Number 2. Pollsmoor Prison. Pollsmoor Prison, located in Cape Town, South Africa, started making rounds on the internet for its bizarre conditions. The prison was originally built for around 4,336 inmates, but houses more than double that number, which, as you can imagine, results in terrible living conditions. But that's not all. What makes it even worse is the gang control. Yeah, the prison staff has little to no control, and gangs within the prison have power over everything that goes down in the facility. There are many cases of violence outbreaks in the prison due to gang activity, and overcrowding leads to staff withholding basic necessities such as food. Oh, and did I tell you that many inmates are forced to sleep on floors next to the toilets? Pollsmoor has housed several high-profile inmates, including political prisoners during apartheid, such as Nelson Mandela and other anti-apartheid activists. Yeah, you really don't want to end up here, ever. Number 3, Kincheng Prison. This one is pretty close to hell. The Kincheng Prison in China is home to the country's political prisoners. It is infamous due to the secrecy around the prison and its outlandish punishments. This facility is heavily guarded, and there's something eerie about the limited access that almost makes us question what really goes on there. Well, one of the lightest punishments is to first starve the prisoners and then give them a bowl of very greasy noodles, and it only gets worse from here. Plus, there's this tiger chair used to torture prisoners. As a form of punishment, the inmates are denied medical care. Yeah, even after all the physical abuse. And don't even think you're getting out of the forced labor. It doesn't matter if you've got a broken leg. There are absolutely zero compensations. Some high-profile political prisoners housed in the prison include Wei Jingsheng, a prominent pro-democracy activist, and Liu Xiaobo, a Nobel Peace Prize laureate who advocated for political reform in China. Imagine being a Nobel Peace Prize winner only to be denied all basic human rights. Sucks to be Liu. Number 4, Alcatraz. This prison, located on Alcatraz Island just off San Francisco, got closed all the way back in 1963. But that doesn't stop it from making it on our list. This prison housed some of the most dangerous and high-risk prisoners in the States. The island location of Alcatraz meant that the prisoners were completely cut off from the mainland, which made escape impossible. However, Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers attempted to swim off to the mainland and were never seen again. Their fate still remains unknown after several years of investigation. Life inside the prison was said to be hell, and there were countless stories of inmates going crazy or attempting to end their lives. The violence was out of hand, and the bizarre environment of the prison even earned it a movie known as Escape from Alcatraz. It was also nicknamed Hellcatraz, and it really lived up to its name. Some of its most notable prisoners were Al Capone, Mickey Cohen, Machine Gun Kelly, and Robert Stroud, aka the Birdman of Alcatraz. Number 5. Tadmor Military Prison. This one might send chills down your spine. The Tadmor Military Prison, located in Syria, is synonymous with death, torture, horror, and madness. The prison was built by the French in the 1930s in the heart of the desert, about 200 kilometers northeast of Damascus. In 1980, Tadmor Prison experienced a violent uprising by inmates. How the Syrian government responded shocked the whole world. They launched a brutal crackdown that killed around 1,000 inmates in just a few minutes. There's more. Those who didn't die in the 1980s uprising were either executed or died under torture, and those who somehow managed to survive met a fate far worse than death. There was widespread violence and torture, and methods included beatings, electric shocks, and stress positions. The craziest part is that this one isn't even the worst prison on the list. Number 6. La Santé Prison. When you think of Paris, France, the last thing you think of is torture and death. Well, the city of love isn't all butterflies and rainbows. Here's the dark truth. Located in Paris, La Santé Prison is anything but a good old typical prison. La Santé has had numerous riots, executions, and escapes. The inmates are only allowed to shower twice, but that's the last thing on their minds because a lack of proper ventilation means they can't even breathe easily. It's no shock that the absurd living conditions drive inmates crazy and force them to take their own lives. In 1999, La Santé witnessed the death of a little over 100 inmates. To add insult to injury, there's a class system in the jail that makes living conditions even worse for the lower class. I bet that's something you didn't know about Paris, did you? Number 7. Camp 22, North Korea. Camp 22, also known as Horiong Concentration Camp, was one of the most notorious political prison camps in North Korea. It is reported to have been closed in 2012 and has since been North Korea's biggest secret. Of course, the government has always denied its existence, but that's far from the truth. Camp 22 was made for political prisoners and even housed their entire families at times, including children. Torture and punishments in Camp 22 were reportedly severe and included beatings, forced starvation, solitary confinement in small underground cells, and public executions as methods of intimidation and control. Not only this, but over 1,500 to 2,000 people died from malnutrition every year, mostly including children. This prison really showed that North Korea is ready to cross any lines when it comes to human rights violations. Number 8. Carandiru Penitentiary. Located in Brazil, Carandiru Penitentiary was South America's biggest prison, housing more than 8,000 inmates. But all 8,000 of these prisoners lead a life far worse than death. The prison is infamous for its extremely poor living conditions, including overcrowded cells, inadequate sanitation, and limited access to basic necessities. Carandiru gained international attention after the infamous massacre of 1992. The event began after a game of football, as a fight between two teams escalated into a chaotic prison riot. The military police fired back and ended up killing 111 prisoners who were unarmed. The police officers were later convicted for their crimes, but the trials were deemed dull. Due to its notorious reputation and the ongoing issues with violence and overcrowding, Carandiru Penitentiary was finally closed in 2002. The infamous incident ended up getting its own novel, Carandiru Station, by Drauzio Varela, and the subsequent film adaptation, Carandiru, directed by Hector Babenco. Number 9. Nairobi Prison, Kenya. Nairobi Prison, located in Kenya, is home to some of the most torturous environments in the whole world. This prison was designed to accommodate 800 prisoners. It now houses over 4,000 without any expansion. The overcrowding is so severe that prison cages meant for 3 people are often crammed up with 12 people. Disease, systemic abuse, and violence run within its walls, increasing the already hopeless situation. Yeah, imagine living in a building that is filled with bodies to the brim, and violence and disease are around every corner. It's hard to call this one a prison because basic human rights are nowhere to be found, and many people call it a concentration camp instead. Bizarre enough yet? Wait till you hear about cannibalism in some of these camps. Oh yeah, torture isn't where we draw the line. No wonder this prison is on this list. Guess the cruelty just doesn't end anywhere. Number 10. Bang Kwang Central Prison. This execution chamber is straight out of your nightmares. Just north of Bangkok, Thailand, Bang Kwang Central Prison opened in 1933 and has ever since been making headlines for its cruelty towards inmates. Prisoners were typically forced to have shackles welded to their legs to prevent escape. However, these regulations were said to have changed in 2013. There have been bizarre stories about guards beating mentally ill, elderly, pregnant prisoners and malnourished inmates. And as for the meals, they're all mostly maggot-infested. It's enough to explain how dirty the insides must be. Reports also suggest that there is an internal class system that has the poorer of the inmates do chores for the wealthy in exchange for food. Some famous prisoners include members of the Bangkok Six, a group of foreigners arrested for drug offenses in the 1990s. Oh, and did I tell you? There's no medical care, so if you somehow fall sick or catch a disease, you're pretty much done for. Apart from that, there are not enough basic facilities like beds and food for the prisoners either, but we have to remember that this prison is also the one for serial killers and other criminals with major crimes on their records. Number 11. El Rodeo, Venezuela. At this point, I'm sure you're used to every prison on the list being a center for torture and violence. Well, the El Rodeo prison in Venezuela is no less. In June 2011, clashes between inmates and security forces resulted in a major uprising that led to the deaths of at least 22 inmates and injuries to many others. If anything, it just improved their overcrowding situation a bit because the prison is jam-packed with bodies. To make things worse, like many prisons in Latin America, El Rodeo is heavily influenced by gang activity. The living conditions are so bad that prisoners have tried taking their lives several times. Plus, you can't really have access to legal representation, so once you're in there, you're pretty much stuck with no way out. Unless you want to try a prison break, that too won't result much because there is high surveillance everywhere. Then it is even reported that there are practically whole families of gang owners living inside this jail. Imagine being innocent and getting stuck here. Number 12. Sabaneta Prison. Sabaneta Prison, officially known as Centro Penitenciario de Occidente, is located in Maracaibo, Venezuela. While its poor infrastructure has caught the eyes of many, it's actually the brutal and bizarre torture methods in the prison that have raised eyebrows all over the world. There have been reports of sexual abuse and exploitation of inmates by both prison staff and other prisoners within Sabaneta Prison. Even with a force of guards, this prison isn't safe at all. Psychological torture is one of the most famous torture methods used in prison. The staff is reported to make threats against inmates or their families, prolonged isolation, and verbal abuse to break the inmates and mess with their minds. It doesn't stop here. Prisoners are forced to remain in solitary confinement, and there have been allegations of inmates being subjected to electric shocks as a method of torture or intimidation by prison authorities. Oh, and there's also a denial of medical treatment even in cases of severe illness or injury, so unless you know your first aid, there's not much you can do. These brutal prisons make normal prisons seem like a 5-star hotel to the inmates, and they would kill for one. Number 13. Stanley Prison. Stanley Prison, located in Hong Kong, is known for its strict discipline and harsh punishments for not following them. Now, when I say strict discipline, I really mean it, because there's absolutely nothing you can do out of your free will here. That includes nature's call. Everything from meal times to shower breaks is pre-planned, and you can't even breathe if it's not on schedule. Okay, that's an exaggeration now. Or is it? The harsh conditions at Stanley Prison, including isolation, overcrowding, and regimented routines, often result in the inmates facing mental health issues. Come on, now that was a given. If you dare break any rule, you may be subjected to physical restraints, such as handcuffs or leg irons, under the supervision of prison staff. So if you like moving your limbs, you better stay on the regime. Plus, there's no place to cool down during Hong Kong's harsh heat strokes. Some inmates just strip naked out of the heat and frustration. Number 14. San Quentin State Prison. The oldest prison in California, San Quentin, was opened in 1852 and is one of the nation's most infamous prisons. So what's the catch about this one? Torture? Violence? Outbreaks? Well, it's known as the most populous death row in the country. Since 1893, over 400 people have been put to death at San Quentin. And if you're not put to death, you still live a life close to that in hell. It has also faced severe overcrowding issues over the years, which has led to cramped living conditions, strained infrastructure, and increased tension among inmates. Some of the most famous prisoners here have been Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez, and Richard Chase. The prison has specialized units for inmates who require protective custody or solitary confinement, and it has been reported to drive inmates crazy. Yeah, saw that one coming. Number 15, Diyarbakir Prison. The prison was built in 1980 by the Turkish Ministry of Justice. After the Turkish coup on September 12th that year, the prison became a martial law facility where prisoners were tortured. So how many prisoners are we talking about? 1,000? 10,000? Well, how about a total of 650,000 people? Yeah, because that's how many people were detained following the coup for forced assimilation of the Kurds. More than 500 prisoners died due to the atrocities carried out in the facility. And let me tell you, they sound like they came straight out of a horror flick. Inmates suffered horrific physical and mental abuse, which included Palestinian hangings, which see prisoners hung by the arms, mock executions, electric shock to the genitals, extraction of nails and teeth, and even rape. In 2021, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the prison would be turned into a cultural center. But after listening to all the horrors, I'm not sure if I would ever want to be near it. Number 16. Black Dolphin Prison. Home to the most brutal criminals in Russia, the Black Dolphin prison houses serial killers, terrorists, rapists, cannibals, and pedophiles. Upon arrival, inmates are subjected to blindfolding and handcuffing to prevent them from mapping out the prison layout, minimizing their chances of escape. That's not even all. Inmates are only allowed 90 minutes of exercise a day. Apart from that, they are not allowed to lay down or even sit on their bunks for 16 hours of wake time. They are held in solitary confinement for up to 22 hours a day in small, windowless cells. The cells are equipped with CCTV cameras and steel doors, with slots for food delivery. And there have been many reports of cannibalism in the facility, and these claims aren't ones to be taken lightly. This prison is the first on our list with reports of cannibalism, but it's surely not the only one. The Black Dolphin's 700 residents have killed a total of 3,500 people, which makes it one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. Number 17. Evin Prison. Evin Prison in Tehran, Iran, is one that sends chills down the spine of anyone who's familiar with its dark history. This is the facility where the Iranian government detains its political enemies and subjects them to unimaginable torture and brutal interrogation techniques. Yeah, all interrogations aren't like what we see in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. The ones at Evin Prison are nothing but absolutely terrifying. There have been reports of physical beatings, psychological abuse, and prolonged solitary confinement in tiny windowless cells known as coffins. Evin Prison is the closest you can get to hell on Earth, so you really would never want to end up here. The international community has repeatedly condemned Evin for its human rights violations, but the horrors within its walls continue to make it one of the most feared prisons in the world. Number 18. Guantanamo Bay. The thing about Guantanamo Bay, located in Cuba, is that it detains individuals without trials and then puts them through the worst imaginable torture. It was opened in 2002 under the direction of President Bush following the September 11th attacks, as Bush initiated the War on Terror and opened Guantanamo Bay to serve as a military prison. The routine use of torture includes waterboarding and sexual abuse. There have been several reports of inmates unaliving themselves at Guantanamo Bay. Many inmates have tried protesting against the harsh living conditions by going on hunger strikes, but were force-fed using nasal and rectal feeding, which is just another violation of human rights. Amnesty International has called the prison a major human rights violation, describing it as, quote, the gulag of our times. Number 19. Muhanga Prison. Formerly known as Gitarama Prison, Rwanda's Muhanga Prison is notorious for being dangerously overcrowded and for its inhumane conditions. But that's not the worst part about it. The lack of meals paired with overcrowding results in inmates being hungry for each other's flesh? Quite literally. Yeah, there have been several reports of cannibalism at the Muhanga prison, with some prisoners attempting to eat their own flesh. The inmates are often forced to stand all day on wet and dirty ground, which means the health complications are many and severe. You lost me at prisoners eating their own flesh out of hunger. Talk about a prison full of zombies. Number 20. Mendoza Prison. With a population roughly 3 times its capacity, Mendoza Prison in Argentina is severely overcrowded. Almost every prison on our list had an overcrowding problem. So what sets this one apart? The conditions at Mendoza Prison are so bad that inmates have gone as far as to sew their mouths up in demand of better living conditions. The dire living conditions include torture and, in many cases, even death to inmates. There is no medical care, and the sewerage system is so bad that inmates are forced to use plastic bags and bottles as their washrooms. A death sentence is better than a life at the Mendoza prison because hell couldn't be far off. And that's all I have for you today. Did you find any of these prisons bizarre and scary? Make sure to let us know in the comments. See you in the next video. Goodbye.